Hey, everybody. Welcome back to You Can Homeschool with Tracy Hagerman and Pat Fenner. Tracy's not here today. I have the real privilege of interviewing Dwane Thomas. He is the originator. Well, where our family knows him from is Visual Latin. Years back in the day when we were homeschooling, we studied Latin. And actually, that Visual Latin was one of the few lessons that we all sat down for, because I think you'll discover Dwayne's got a great sense of humor and we just loved him. And so I really want to thank you again, Dwayne, for joining us today, because it's definitely a privilege. So I'm going to let Dwayne talk a little bit about himself. Dwayne, I thought maybe just for our listeners, you could talk a little bit about, who you are, a little bit about your history, your family, and definitely a little bit about your involvement in homeschooling.
Okay. So where to begin? My wife and I have 5 kids. We live in Franklin, Tennessee, and they're all pretty much grown. We still have a couple living at home, 3 living at home, but one's hardly ever there. She's always working. 2 have moved out. My son, I have 1 son and 4 daughters. My son lives out in Winter Park, Colorado at the moment. He's working at ski and mountain bike resorts just because he wanted to find out what that was like.
Good for
So he's
him.
out there. It's a really, if you've never been there, it's a cool place. It snows a lot. I like snow, and I live in Tennessee. There's no snow, so anyway, I'm kind of jealous. But anyway, we homeschooled our kids, or at least attempted to do so. Homeschooling is one of those things where it's kind of like building a house. You don't know what you're doing, and then when you're done, you now know how to build a house, but you no longer need those skills unless you're gonna build another house. And so anyway, we kind of learned as we went along. I was homeschooled. My parents homeschooled me in Europe because my parents were missionaries over there, which is where I was kind of surrounded by languages and introduced to languages when I was a kid. So I thought I knew what I was doing when we started homeschooling our kids, but I would do it again, but I would do it differently. It turns out I didn't know what I was doing, and neither did my wife.
That
My wife
is
is
so
a
true.
My wife is an educator. She was raised by educators. She got a degree in education. She taught in schools. So we kind of thought, oh, she'll know what to do. And then I was homeschooled, and so we thought, oh, I'll know what to do. We would do it differently if we did it again.
I think that's probably the story for a lot of us. Yes.
If you've ever watched Carol Joy Side's Homeschooling Made Simple, that's what we wish we had done. And we got close to it, but we wish we'd just gone all in. And if I could describe my own homeschool education, that was it. It was essentially a lot of freedom and a lot of reading. And that's what I would recommend to most people. It's risky. I've also been a classroom educator. I was in the classroom for almost 20 years. And to be honest, it's easier to just drop your kids off at school and let the professionals do it. But I got to tell you, the professionals don't know what they're doing either. C.S. Lewis talks about that in The Abolition of Man, that our world is only sane because mothers and children have resisted the attempts of educators throughout history.
Wow. That's excellent. That's definitely how I feel too. It almost seems like those of us homeschooling parents who have had training in public education are at a disadvantage. There's so much that you get taught is in training to be a teacher, school teacher, that isn't even relevant, to learning, period.
I've been in the classroom for a long, long time. I was homeschooled. So I went to 2nd grade and maybe 3rd grade. I can't remember when my parents pulled me out. And then we moved so much that they started homeschooling my sister and I. So, and this was back in the 80s. So I thought, oh, I'm getting an inadequate education. Once I became cognizant of what was going on, I thought, oh, I'm less than, I'm getting an inadequate education. So I kind of idealized this school setting. And when I got a chance to become a teacher and go into it, I went into it. And 20 years on the other side of it, I was so happy that I was homeschooled, because to be blunt, in the classroom, and you can have good classrooms, bad classrooms, but even in a good classroom, you're maybe learning half. If you're there for an hour, you're maybe learning half an hour. The rest of the time is people asking to go to the restroom, throwing pencils, airplanes, flirting with the girl next to them. I mean, it's just so many little interruptions when you put that many people in a room.
Well, and also when you combine with the fact that a lot of kids don't learn that way.
Correct.
You may be spending a time in the classroom and that's not your mode of learning. So that's pretty much an hour wasted, you know.
Is a lot of time wasted. John Taylor Gatto, I'm sure you've read his stuff,
Yeah.
basically says that classroom education is about complicity, learning to obey, learning to stand in line, learning to do what it was originally designed to do. You probably know the history of it. The
Mhm.
Prussians lost a battle against Napoleon, I think it was, and they decided we can't let that happen again. So we've got to get people to stand in line and do what they're told without questioning what's going on. In fact,
Mhm.
infantry comes from the Latin word infans, which is where we get the word infant, but it means it's from an old Latin word. I mean, they're all old, but
Right.
there's different strata, but it's from an old Latin word that means don't talk.
Oh,
So
wow.
you stand in line, you shut your mouth, you take your orders, you go where you don't want to go, even when there's bullets flying, and
Yeah.
you don't talk. And that's what the Prussian education system was designed to do, because when they went up against Napoleon, I think it was in the Battle of Jena, they lost, and they had to come up with some system to get
Mhm.
people to go in there and obey. And it's weird that we're still using that system so many years later.
Oh yeah, hook, line, and sinker. We've
Uh,
gotten it. Yeah. So go. I guess that's a good segue into some of the questions I had too for you. You mentioned Latin. Was Visual Latin the first language program that you did, or because I know that was we discovered that a while ago.
Yeah, it's the only one. I mean, I teach Greek and Latin,
Hmm.
and I teach French and Spanish and Italian. I put quotation marks up because basically what I'm doing on my website is just learning publicly online, and anyone members of my site are welcome to join and watch the process.
Wow.
So I'm not fluent in French, Spanish, or Italian. I'm just learning it
Mhm.
publicly, but I teach those languages as well. But as far as going to a studio, standing there for years and talking to a camera, editing all that, cleaning it up, Visual Latin so far is the only one we've done.
Well, it was definitely a gem. We enjoyed it. What and I guess well, a question which I guess you've answered already. What was your motivation for? I mean, you have really kind of dedicated, right, your business life to language learning. Is
That is correct. Yeah.
Mhm. Would you say that it was pretty much motivated by your growing up years? I mean, was that kind of what started that?
I think so. When I was a kid, I spent about 11 or 12 years in Europe growing up. My dad was either in the military for a while or he was back as a missionary. So he and mom spent 20 years over there. My sister and I spent 12, 11 or 12 years over there. Well,
Mhm.
there was one point when we were in the Netherlands, in Holland, for 4 years. And for some reason, this was my last school experience. For some reason, my parents put me in the Department of Defense schools on
Mm.
the US Air Base. And my sister went to a local school in our town. So I had to ride a bus. They used tour buses, which was interesting. So at least it was a nice ride. But I had to ride a bus an hour to school and then an hour home every day
Oh my
to get
God.
to the air base where my school was. And my sister just walked to her school. Well, this took place over the course of about 4 years. Uh, and I wasn't in the public schools the entire time. But anyway, about 4 years. And my sister became fluent in Dutch, and I became fluent in disrupting class. Essentially, I was not a very good student in school. So when we left Holland, we ended up back. Ended up in England, and then in Louisiana, and then back in Europe. We went to Germany the next time, and this was over a span of years. When we got to Germany, I thought to myself, okay, I'm not doing that again. I'm not going to live in another country and not speak the language, because I wish I spoke Dutch, but I don't.
Mm.
So when we got to Germany, I hit the ground running and I taught myself German. I knew we moved so much, and I never knew when we were going to move because the
Mm.
military decided, or missionary, what my dad was doing on the mission field changed. So I hit the ground running because I was like, we may only be in Germany for 6 months. And we ended up there for 3.5 years. So I learned German actually pretty well.
Wow.
And then I came back to the States and went to college. I was about 18 or 19 at the time. I went all the way through college. I got a degree in business and I got a degree in history, which I should probably resell because I've never used those. But anyway, um, I got a degree in those fields. And the last semester, I think it was, I was in college. My girlfriend at the time, we're married now, she invited me to a conference in Virginia. It's a Christian Student Worldview Conference. It may still be going on, Virginia Beach. And I went with her. And one of the speakers there was talking about the founding fathers and their education,
Mm.
how they could all speak Latin and Greek. And of course, that's an exaggeration. They couldn't all, but a lot of them could.
Hmm.
And it was their training in Latin and Greek that directed some of their thought processes, but also their power with the English language.
Mm.
And I thought, oh, wow, I want to learn Latin. I decided to postpone Greek, but I decided I would learn Latin.
Hmm.
So I was 23 at the time. I had a semester of college left. I actually went back to my college and said, I just asked my advisor, you guys teach it? No, they didn't teach it. Cause I was going to say, I'll just add another year and take it. But it was too late. So I graduated and I just started teaching myself Latin. And it really wasn't related to German at all. I was hoping German would help. Some of the grammar is very similar, but the vocabulary is not. But, that's what got me started in Latin. And then as I started going, I still spoke German. And as I started going into Latin, I started noticing that the two languages, if you mesh those two languages over the course of 1,000 years, you get what we're speaking to each other.
Wow.
That's what happens. About half of our conversation this morning is probably German and half is Latin.
Wow. So now I can tell the kids I know German. That's great.
German is shockingly English at times. I mean, if you speak English, you're not going to be able to quickly speak German. It's a tough language, but the similarities are actually pretty astonishing.
Well, it's funny. My aunt, one of my aunts married a man who was of German descent, and their kids, my cousins, all taught themselves German. And to hear them talking is just it is funny. Like there's certain, like a word or a phrase or something that I'll pull out and I'm like, oh wait, that sounds like I might know what they're talking about. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's really interesting. So would you say that learning language specifically, let's talk about Latin and Greek, like you eventually learned Greek, correct?
I
Yeah.
started learning Greek when I was 35 and realized how hard it was going to be. So I moved over there 3 times and actually got residency in Greece so that I could master the language. But then my son had an accident in Colorado and we had to abruptly cut that short and come back to the States.
Mhm. Wow. Well, if that I can see wanting to live in Greece. My daughter and daughter-in-law and son went there for their honeymoon, and yeah, I'm up for that. I'll learn Greek if I can move over there.
There you go. Yeah, you just need to move over there to master the language. It's a tough one.
Yeah, yeah. I give you a lot of kudos at 35 starting because I know the older we get, our brains just aren't as elastic. But I'm sure that that helped you. So, but back to all the rabbits I'm chasing here. Um, The, so would you say that learning Latin and Greek, did you agree with that thought that you had heard about that, how it gave them power over English and over their language, and would you agree with that assessment for you? Was that your truth?
Yeah, so I ran a test on myself, and it was a 20-year test. And I don't know. Yeah, I would do it again. I was going to say, I don't know if I would do it again, but yeah, I would do it again. So I'll say some controversial things and I'll try to be nice. But I've seen some advertisements for Latin, sometimes I think people get a little bit too excited about it and they maybe oversell it a little bit.
Mhm.
So some of the advertisements I've seen for it and some of the reasons I've seen to study Latin, I don't know. They say it makes you detail oriented. Maybe, maybe not. I'm a guy. I try to be detail oriented, but my wife just laughs at me. She just I don't know how she keeps up with the details, and I'm over here thinking, come on, I spent all these years learning Latin, and one of the promises was it would make me detail oriented. I'm not sure it does that, but I can tell you this. Earl Nightingale one time said, before you do anything else, master your own language.
Mm.
And one of the ways that you can master the language, and you don't have to learn Latin and Greek to master the language, and you don't have to learn Latin and Greek to have a fulfilled life. Look around. There are, most people have generally fulfilled lives, and most people have not studied Latin and Greek anymore.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a little bit of overselling when people say, you really have to know Latin and Greek. Maybe, maybe not. But will it help you master your own language? I think it will.
Mm.
The reason is you're basically, if you think of the Mississippi River at the mouth, when it flows out of New Orleans into the Gulf of Mexico, is enormous. So if you just look at the Mississippi River there, then you have a certain understanding of the Mississippi River. But if you trace it back to its
Mhm.
founding, you have a deeper understanding of where this river came from, where it started, where it's going, its significance, what it means. You're doing the same thing when you study Greek and Latin. So you can study English. English is a massive language. There's something like 1 million words in our language. To give you some context, there are, I think, about 250,000 words in the German language.
Mm.
Latin has about 75,000 words in it. English has over 1 million words in it. And there's a guy named Charles Hodges who wrote a book called Global Wording. And I believe it was in his book, he said that English adds about 150 words a day. And
Oh my.
if you've ever seen the movie The Professor and the Madman, so I recommend it with hesitation. It's got some parts in it that are a little bit disturbing, and
Mm.
it's definitely upper. I wouldn't show it to a middle schooler. My kids have seen it, but again, there's some themes in there that you've really got to work through. But the story is of the guy who wrote the Oxford English Dictionary.
Oh,
When he started the book, when he started the Oxford English Dictionary, he figured it would take him a couple of years. Well, this started in the 1800s, and they're still working on it,
oh my gosh.
still adding words. And he made it to the letter K when he passed on. It's a fabulous movie. Mel Gibson is in it. He's the guy who he's writing the Oxford English Dictionary. Fascinating movie, especially for someone who studies languages.
Mhm.
Professor and the Madman. But you can kind of get a glimpse into what he's doing there. Like, he has a mastery of the English language that his peers don't have, because he knows the source languages to English.
Mhm.
So you can learn English fine, and you can master English. So many people have. Just read a book, turn on the TV. You'll see all kinds of people who have mastered English who haven't mastered Greek and Latin. That's fine. It's doable. But you do get a little more insight into the language if you study those languages.
Mhm. So what would
Go ahead.
you gonna ask a question?
Oh, well, I was going to give you an example from the Mississippi River. So if the headwaters of the Mississippi River are actually in Itasca, Wisconsin, I think it is. So
Wisconsin.
Itasca sounds like a Native American name,
Yeah.
but it's not. The guy who tracked down the headwaters of the Mississippi River, he knew Greek and Latin because they all did back then. I'm exaggerating, but it was pretty
Mhm.
common.
Right.
So he took the two Latin words, veritas, which means true, and caput, which means head, chopped off the extremities of both those words, ran them together, and created Itasca, which
Oh,
sounds like a Native American word, but it
yeah.
means true head, the true head of the Mississippi River. So there's
Wow.
things like that in our language just that are scattered all over the place that you just don't see if you don't know what's going on.
Right, right. Well, so then what would you boy, this is fascinating. I could talk with you all afternoon. So there are families and who have college-bound kids who you have to have a language to go to college, right? 2 years of a language. So given that, would you suggest that? I mean, I know Latin is considered a dead language only because it's not, well, correct me if I'm wrong, only because it's not actively spoken. Is that what defines a dead language? But yeah, there are a lot of selling points on why you should study Latin and everything. Would you recommend that or suggest that? Having homeschooled already, looking back, what would you suggest to the next gen of homeschoolers in terms of languages? What would be helpful in our kind of situation and society right now?
Okay. What I'm about to say, I shouldn't say as a Latin teacher,
Okay.
but I'm going to be honest. And this is just me. This is from years of doing this and what I've seen,
Mhm.
how I've seen this all play out in many people's lives, including the lives of my own kids.
Mm.
I would learn French or Spanish or Italian or German. I would learn a modern language first and
Mm.
then learn Latin. And here's why. Latin is tougher than let's just take Spanish. There are more Spanish speakers in the United States than there are in Spain. It's the United States, I think, is the second largest Spanish speaking population in the world. I believe Mexico is the first. But anyway, there are a lot of Spanish speakers here. I was at a tax guy's office yesterday and could have used it yesterday. It's just, it's everywhere. So I would recommend learning Spanish. And here's why. You could take 2 years, maybe 3 if you drag your feet, and learn Spanish. And that's a skill you can use for the rest of your life,
Mm.
right? You've got it. There are people you can go talk to. You can get on a plane and fly to Madrid and go talk to people. You can go tour around Spain, talk to people. You can get better at it. You can fly to Mexico City, decide I want to get fluent at it. I'm going to fly down to Mexico City and I'm going to enroll in an intensive Spanish course,
Mhm.
and you can master the language. You could probably do it in Arizona, New Mexico, Southern California. I mean, there's just opportunities.
Mhm.
Then you can get work in that field. You can translate, you can work for attorneys, you can work in the medical field. And here's the crazy thing: if you learn Spanish, you've kind of waded into the shallow end of the pool. So Latin is going to be easier. The last school I taught in it for almost a decade, was a ministry to the kids, to lower income families. So I ended up with my classes. There were a lot of Hispanic students in my classes.
Mhm.
Those kids, it was a breeze to teach them Latin,
Latin.
because they already knew so much of it from Spanish. Spanish is 80 to 90% Latin.
Wow.
So if you learn Spanish, you can fly all over the world and talk to people. Spanish is the second largest language in the world in terms of speakers.
Mhm.
Chinese is first, Spanish is second. I can't remember what the third one is. I think English, it may be English, but I think English may be fourth on the list. But
Mm.
anyway, I know Spanish is second. So you can fly all over the world and talk to people using Spanish. So that's my argument for learning Spanish. Plus, Spanish makes Latin easier. Now, over to Latin. If you spend all this time learning Latin, and I'll get to that in a minute, if you spend a bunch of time learning Latin, then at the end, you're going to know Latin. You'll be able to fly nowhere, talk to no one, have conversations with no one. So if you're going to learn it, and I'm not opposed to Latin. I'm just saying, like, your question was, what would you do? If I had it to do again, I'd teach my kids Spanish or French first and then Latin,
Mm.
because I didn't even start Latin until I was 23 years old, and I already knew German.
Yeah.
And when you start it later, I feel like you can actually learn it faster. C.S. Lewis said somewhere, and I've never been able to track this quote down, but I know he said it because I read it once, that you can learn all of Latin grammar in 2 years, which is
Wow.
why Visual Latin, by the way, is a 2-year course.
Mhm.
I read all the Latin books, and then I distilled it down to 2 years,
Mhm.
and we put it, I mean, you can go through it as fast or as slow as you want to, but we made it a 2-year course.
Right.
But so you could learn it in 2 years and then move on to another language. That's what I recommend.
Mhm.
But it's going to be easier and you're going to go faster if you already know French or if you already know Spanish. And if you never make it to Latin, you still know French or Spanish.
Mm.
Now, some kids come to me and they're like, yeah, well, I don't want to learn French, or I don't want to learn Spanish, or I don't know what I want to learn. In that case, I would actually recommend Latin. Just don't drag it out over like 7 or 8 years, because there's a real opportunity cost there.
Mhm.
But I would recommend Latin, because Latin then branches into half the languages of Europe. The big ones we know: Italian, French, Portuguese, Romanian. Those are all Romance languages, but there's about 25 languages in Europe that are Romance languages because
Wow.
that's where the Romans went,
Right.
and they imposed their language.
Right. Boy, I never thought about that. That's really interesting. So I'm going to pivot a little bit here. We do have some homeschool dads. We've been doing a series on for homeschool dads to support them, and I know that part of the questions that we've gotten hit with, especially now during COVID, is how do I combine being the breadwinner in the family and homeschooling? Because I think this generation of dads really wants to be more involved, certainly than when we were homeschooling, and definitely when, even in a prior generation. How were you able to do that? Or did your wife work? I know you mentioned a couple times that you taught. Was that, were you an active homeschooling dad, or would you consider yourself an active homeschooling dad when you were during those years? How did you work that all out?
Yeah, this is a long and complicated story. I'll try to sum it up.
Okay.
Before we had kids, we both worked, but
Mhm.
that was only about a year because we had one kid just before our first anniversary. So she worked for a couple of years and then she went home. So I'll be very honest. We worked in a Christian school and together we made $50,000 a year. And we live in Franklin, Tennessee. And even back then, 25 years ago, it was still an expensive place to live. Now it's out of control. I don't know how anybody affords to live here now. But anyway, we had already bought our house long ago, so we don't have to deal with that. But
Right.
I don't know how anybody moving in does it. But anyway, she worked for just a couple of years, and then my mom was home all of my life. So I just was like, you're going home. So she went home to raise our kids, and our income went overnight from $50,000 a year to $25,000 a year.
Ouch.
And it was tough at 50, and it was brutal at 25. So I started delivering pizzas. I cleaned pools. I actually learned a lot of Latin cleaning pools. I worked for a pool cleaning company, and I asked them, "You guys care when this pool gets clean?" And they said, "No, we just want it clean." And I said, "All right." So I started cleaning pools. I had the access. I had the keys. I would start at 3:30 or 4 in the morning and work. I would clean pools before I went to school. And while I was doing that, I would listen to podcasts and audiobooks. And that's where I learned a lot of what I know about languages because nobody was in the pool at 3:30 in the morning as it turns out. And it's a pretty cool job. And then I would deliver pizzas at night. I was basically trying to recreate the income that we had lost when she went home, but I wavered, but I wasn't going to yield on that. And I went to a friend of mine. We were really struggling financially. And I went to a friend of mine and I said, "Man, what do I do?" And he said to me, and I kind of lived on this for years. Uh, he said, "Do you want to send your wife back to work?" And I said, "No, I don't. I do not want to do that. That's not an option." And
Mhm.
he shrugged his shoulders and said, "Well, I think God's trying to see what you're made of then." And I kind of hung on to that statement and,
Wow.
and just pushed through. The flip side of it was there were too many days and nights when I just wasn't around.
Mm.
So I read to my kids a lot in the evening.
Mhm.
I read standing up so I wouldn't fall asleep.
Wow.
I never worked on Sundays. Sunday was family time. Sunday was church and family time. That was it. And that
Mhm.
was non-negotiable. I painted a lot with construction companies. I roofed a lot during the summer. And everything, my only criteria with all these crazy jobs was, can I work alone? And if they said yes, like painting. So I worked for an apartment complex and I painted all of the ironwork all over the apartment complex. If they said yes, I could work alone, then I would take the job because I knew I could listen to podcasts or audiobooks or language training materials. And I knew that if I got better and better and better and better, the opportunity would come to do something with those skills.
Mhm.
And then the opportunity did come. A friend of mine had a studio and a film company that was failing. And he found out that I was failing. And we were at a church picnic together. And he said, "Well, let's go down together." He said, "Are you a good Latin teacher?" And I was kind of discouraged at the time, but my wife was sitting beside me and she said, "Yes, he's very good at what he does." So he said, let's make a video series. Let's see if we can save both of our lives.
Wow.
It worked. It was weird. We stepped up to the plate and got a home run. Visual Latin is really popular. People like it. And it saved both of us financially. And at that point, I was able to step away from all the crazy jobs and spend more time with my kids and my family. But if I had it to do over again, I wouldn't allow myself into that situation. So
Meaning how? Would your wife have gone back to work, or you just wouldn't have taken
no,
extra jobs?
that was non-negotiable.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I would have done all the extra jobs. I don't know that I'd go into education. So somebody said, why don't you just go work for the public schools? Well, I've read enough John Taylor Gatto to know that I would get
Yeah.
fired, or
Yeah.
they'd put me in a holding tank. There's, I don't want to get too distracted, too many rabbit trails, but there was a piece that came out years ago in the New York Times or something about this building in New York City where they have all these public school teachers who they can't fire, but they can't put in the classroom either because they don't know what they're going to say. So they literally go sit in this building all day and like play Monopoly with each other.
I remember that too. That was so beyond wild.
Wasn't that weird?
Yeah.
So I'd be in the building playing Monopoly if I worked at the public school system. And I know I would. They'd fire me. I know I would. I couldn't make it because I wouldn't. There's things that I just can't consciously do.
Right.
I wouldn't be able to work there. I don't care how good the benefits or the pay is. I would have to lay down too many of my principles.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't going to do that. So that wasn't an option. So I probably just wouldn't have gone into education because it's a tough way to make a living.
Mm-hmm.
So for a busy dad, my recommendation would be, try to include your kids if you can in your work. I tried to do that as much as I could. So when my kids were young, they went to a local private school here. The one that I worked with that was a ministry for the inner city kids or the lower income kids. They went with me there. So I was teaching in the same school they were in. So that kept me around them, play with them at recess, eat with them at lunch, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
My son was in Scouts. We went on a lot of camping trips together. My daughters and I've tried to, I try to stay active with them and we bike together. So they're losing interest as they get older, but we used to do a lot of biking together and playing together, but it was just hard. And my wife and I were strained, and at times we weren't getting along, and that spilled down to my kids. I would say it's hard for me to say. I would say find a good church with a good, strong community. We didn't have that. And if you need to generate some more income, the internet is a powerful place to generate some more income. And, try to work in the odd hours. So I just finished reading No Pain, No Gains by Chip Gaines. I don't know if you know him.
Yep.
Chip and Joanna Gaines from whatever the name of their show is.
Yeah.
Anyway, I just finished reading his book, and he said his dad used to say to him when he was a kid, he'd complain about not having enough time to do all this stuff. And his dad would say to him as a kid, nobody's stopping you from working at 5 a.m. So there's always that. I mean, I started for literally decades, I'd get up at 2 or 3 or 4 a.m, and that's when I would start working. And that left me time in the afternoon to spend with my kids. And then you just have to use Sunday to rest, or, I would pick an evening a week where my wife would read to the kids and I would just go to bed because I was just exhausted.
Right.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
But I would do it again. I wouldn't put my kids in the public school system. That's a non-negotiable. There's no way I would back down on that one because, I don't know what it's going to take for Christian families, honestly, to pull their kids out of that system. Every year, every decade, it gets worse. I'm like, okay, where's the turning point? I don't understand, but that's non-negotiable.
Right.
And to be honest, I'm just not a big fan of classroom learning at all anyway, even in a Christian school. And I have lots of good friends and teachers that I know that are still teachers in Christian schools, so it's better. But even there,
it's
not a big fan of classroom education.
Yeah, it's just by virtue of the system. We have a lot of friends who are teachers who really look at their jobs as ministries. That's what they do, and they really plug into and invest into their kids. But they still have to operate within the system, and that's what blows it all. Yeah. Anyway. Well, we are unbelievably, to me, out of time. This has been a fascinating conversation. I just really enjoyed listening to you and getting to know you a little bit, and hearing your thoughts and attitudes. I hope that this has also been a blessing to you guys listening to this. I hope you have enjoyed meeting Dwane Thomas from Visual Latin and other studies and pursuits, of course, but that's what we know him from. And I'll include links to some of the books and the videos and things that he mentioned in the show notes. So make sure you take a look at those things and see if those would help your home educating efforts as well. But in the meantime, one last time, thank you, Dwayne, for joining us today. And as a final note to our listeners, just remember, you can homeschool and it can be fabulous. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.